Our next presentation, inshallah, will be titled Resilience of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it will be by Fatimah Braimoh. I welcome Fatimah Braimoh to the stage.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما اللهم فقهنا في الدين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. A couple of weeks ago, my family was playing the Quranic board game in the living room. I wasn't playing because I was upset with my sister that day, and she was wondering the cards, but eventually I did join because of a specific question she asked. And this question was, what was the surah revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam close to his death? And my initial assumption was Surah An-Nur, Ar-Rahman, one of the longer surahs of the Quran. But I was actually surprised to find that it's one of the shortest surahs of the Quran that most, if not all of us, have memorized. And that's Surah An-Nasr. Nasr means help or aid. And this surah refers specifically to the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the first ayah it says, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, when the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and victory is achieved. A little bit of the backstory behind this surah is, it refers to when the Prophet ﷺ took the believers into Mecca and were able to destroy the idols around the Kaaba. And what was the victory of this? Well, that is said in the second ayah. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا, and you see people in groups and in multitudes entering the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But my topic today is resilience and hardship. So how does the topic of aid and victory relate? Well, the best way I can describe it is through this analogy. Imagine a board game. Let's call this the board game of life. And that every single person starts at the beginning and is working towards the end. And through this ayah, فَإِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, by going through phases of hardship and then phase of ease, is able to move forward. Now, where we differ as believers from disbelievers is that by the end, we will be the victorious people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that during our hardships, we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's aid. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's aid look like? Well, we first have to establish two relationships that Surah An-Nasr establishes about victory and hardship. The first one being, the hardship is always preceded by victory for the believer. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ went through all the years of trials and tribulations, in the end, he was still able to pass his message of Islam to all of us here today. And the second relationship that's established is that a greater victory will always precede a hardship. Another example of this is, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he was born into trial, into tribulation. He was born without a father, and from that point on, he went through more hardships than any other human being in this world. So if you look at his life from an objective perspective, his life is rough, it's hard. But 1400 years after his death, we are all standing here today believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of his message and because he was successful. 63 years compared to 1400, there's a huge difference. But how much difference? And that led to my research question. How does the victory of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam compare to his hardships? And so we look back at his life. He was born without a father, as I mentioned earlier. His mother died at the age of 6 years old. He lost all his children within his lifetime, except Fatimah radiallahu anha, who died a short while after him. And he experienced the year of sorrow, or Aam al-Huzn, where he lost his supportive wife Khadija radiallahu anha, who believed in him when nobody else believed in him. And then he also lost Abu Talib, who protected him from the Quraysh. And then he experienced the trial of Dawah, where he was trying to warn these people about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that their deeds were going to be taken into account on the day of judgment. But what did these people do to him? They told their wives, the women, the children, the slaves, they told all of them to go and throw rocks at him till his shoes were filled with blood. And then he was approached by Angel Jibreel during this whole trial. And Angel Jibreel said to him, Ya Rasulullah, I have the angel of the mountains with me. And he can take these big, huge mountains and he can crush these people disrespecting me. Now let's imagine ourselves in his position. I know for some of us, we would have been like, Angel Jibreel, finally you're here. Crush that family over there, that family over there for disrespecting me. But the Prophet ﷺ was rahmatul lil alameen. And his response aligned with that fact. He said, no, perhaps their descendants may be among the people who believe. And this whole circumstance shows three beautiful characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ: patience, resilience, and mercy. And this is the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody can show patience except by Allah's decree. And sure, the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can manifest in many ways. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ was able to take this huge army of believers into Mecca to destroy those idols on the Kaaba, but we fail to realize sometimes that he was a one-man army, showing mercy and resilience during the trials he faced alone. So now we're back to the question, how does his victory compare to all the hardships the Prophet ﷺ went through? And the real answer is, Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best. What we do know though, is that his reward is going to be much greater than whatever he went through. For example, in Surah Al-Qalam, ayah 33, it says, كَذَلِكَ الْعَذَابُ وَالْعَذَابُ الْآخِرَةِ أَكْبَرُ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. That the punishment of this life is great, but the punishment of the hereafter is greater, if only they knew. And as believers, we can see it the opposite way as well. That the reward of this life is great, but the reward of the hereafter is greater. Same logic applies to فَإِنَّ مَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. We can also see it the opposite way, that with ease comes hardship. It's a relationship that works vice versa. And now the question comes, how can we become more patient and more resilient? Well, we've established that being patient and resilient during hard times is only through the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes from His mercy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to whom He wills. But a way to strengthen and to make us susceptible to Allah's mercy is through strengthening the bond between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the real question is, how do we strengthen the bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the answer is the last ayah of Surah An-Nasr. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ تَوَّابًا. By constantly praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking for His forgiveness and understanding that He is one to forgive. But to want to strengthen the bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to be able to trust Him. In fact, in Surah Al-Ghabun, ayah 13, it says, Allahu la ilaha illahu wa 'ala Allahi falyatawakkalul mu'minun. That within this ayah it says that the believers trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can we call ourselves believers if we do not trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants a relationship with us just as much as we want a relationship with Him? And so I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to emulate the beautiful characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to make us among His victorious people. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.